Chapter 13. In the whirl of the succeeding days, it was a mooted question whether Madeline's guests or her cowboys or herself got the keenest enjoyment out of the flying time. Considering the sameness of the cowboys' ordinary life, she was inclined to think that they made the most of the present. Stillwell and Stewart, however, had found the situation trying. The work of the ranch had to go on, and some of it got sadly neglected. Stillwell could not resist the ladies any more than he could resist the fun and the extraordinary ongoings of the cowboys. Stewart alone kept the business of cattle raising from a serious setback. Early and late he was in the saddle, driving the lazy Mexicans whom he had hired to relieve the cowboys. One morning in June, Madeline was sitting on the porch with her merry friends when Stillwell appeared on the corral path. He had not come to consult Madeline for several days, an omission so unusual as to be remarked.
"Here comes Bill, in trouble,"
laughed Lawrence. Indeed, he bore some faint resemblance to a thundercloud as he approached the porch, but the greeting he got from Madeline's party, especially from Helen and Dorothy, chased away the blackness from his face and brought the wonderful wrinkling smile.
"Well, Miss Majesty, sure I'm a sad demoralizing old cattleman," he said presently, "and I'm in need of a heap of help."
"What's wrong now?"
asked Madeline with her entourage smiling.
"Well, it's amazingly strange what cowboys will do. I was just about to give up. Why do you think of that? We've changed the shifts and shortened the hours, let one another off duty and hired greasers, and in fact done everything that could be thought of. But this vacation idea grows worse. When Stewart sets his foot down, then the boys begin to be getting sick, and never in my born days as a cattleman have ever heard of so many diseases. And I ought to see how lame and crippled and weak many of the boys have got all of a sudden. The idea of a cowboy coming to me with a sore finger and asking me let off for a day. There's Bowley. Now I've known a horse to fall all over him, and once he's rolled down a canyon. Never bothered him at all. Now he's got a blister on his heel, a riding blister, and he said it's going to be taken to blood poison if he doesn't get rest. And then there's Jim Bell. He developed what he says is a spinal magotitis or such like. And then there's Frankie Slade. He swore he had scarlet fever because his face was burnt so red. And I guess when I hollered that scarlet fever was contagious, he must have been some put away, because he up and says he guessed it wasn't that after all. But he sure's awfully sick and needing a loaf round and being amused. Why, even Nels don't want to work these days. If it wasn't for Stewart, who had them greasers with the cattle, I don't know what I'd do."
"Why all these sudden illnesses and idleness?"
asked Madeline.
"Well, you see, the truth is every blamed cowboy on the range except Stewart thinks it's his bounden duty to entertain these ladies."
"I think it's just fine,"
exclaimed Dorothy Combs, and she joined in the general laugh.
"Stewart, then? Don't you care to entertain us as well?"
inquired Helen in curious interest.
"Well, Miss Helen, Stewart is sure different from the other cowboys," replied Stillwell. "Yet he's used to being around 'em. There never was a cowboy fuller of devil than Gene, but now he's changed. He's foreman here, and that must be it. All the responsibilities rest upon him. He sure has no time for amusing the ladies."
"I imagine that's our loss," says Edith, in her earnest way. "I do admire him." "Stillwell, you do not need to be distressed for what is only gallantry amongst the boys, even if it's a temporary confusion in the work," said Madeline.
"Miss Majesty, all I said's not the half, nor the quarter, nor nothing of what's troubling me,"
answered he sadly. Very well, unburden yourself then.
Well, the cowboys, exceptin' of Gene, have gone plumb batty. Just plain crazy over this here game of golf.
A merry parley of mirth greeted Stillwell's solemn interaction.
Oh, Stillwell, you are in fun, replied Madeline.
I hope to die if I ain't done in the dangdest, declared the cattleman. It's amazingly strange. You ask Flo, she'll tell you. She knows cowboys, and how if they ever start on something they ride it until they ride a hoss.
Florence, being appealed to, and evidently feeling all eyes upon her, modestly replied that Stillwell had scarcely misstated the situation.
Cowboys do play like they work or fight, she added. They give their whole souls to it. They are just great big simple boys. Indeed they are, said Madeline. Oh, I'm glad if they like the game of golf. They have so little play.
Well, something's got to be did if we're going to be doing any cattle raising on this ranch, replied Stillwell.
He appeared both deliberate and resigned. Madeline remembered that despite Stillwell's simplicity, he was as deep as any of his cowboys, and there was absolutely no gagging him with the possibilities of fun when they were concerned. Madeline fancied that he was exaggerating talk about the cowboy's sudden craze for golf, for in line with certain other remarkable tales that had lately come from him. Some very strange things had occurred of late, and it was impossible to tell whether or not they were accidents, mere coincidence, or deeply laid, skillfully worked out designs of fun-loving cowboys. Certainly there had been great fun, and at the expense of her guests, particularly Castleton. So Madeline was at a loss to know what to think about Stillwell's latest. From mere force of habit, she sympathized with him, and found difficulty in doubting his sincerity.
To go back a ways,
went on Stillwell, as Madeline looked up expectantly,
you recall what pride the boys took in fixing up that golf course out there on the mesa? Well, they worked on that job, and though I never seen any other course, I gamble yours can't be beat. The boys was sure curious about that game, and you recollect also how they wanted to see you and your brother play and be caddies for you. Well, whenever you'd quit, they'd go up and try working and playing on that game. Monty Price, he was the leading spirit, and old as I am, His Majesty, and used as I am to cowboys' eccentrics, I nearly dropped dead when I heard that little hobblefoot burnt-up Montana cowpuncher saying there wasn't any game so swell to him, and that golf was just his speed. Serious as a preacher, mind you, he was, and he was just up there practicing. When Stewart gave him charge of the course and the clubhouse and all them funny there sticks, why, Monty was tickled to death. You see, Monty is sensitive that he ain't got much good work for being cowboy any more. He was glad to have a job that he didn't feel he was hanging on to by kindness. Well, he practiced the game and he read the books in the clubhouse, and he's got the boys doing the same. That wasn't very hard, I reckon. They played early and late and in the moonlight, and for a while Monty was a coach and the boys stood it. But pretty soon Frankie Slade got puffed up on his game, and he had to have her out with Monty. Well, Monty beat him pretty bad, and then one after another the boys tackled Monty, and he beat them all. And after that they split up and began playing matches 2-on-1. For a spell that worked out fine, but cowboys never was satisfied lost as they're winning all the time. Monty and Link Stevens, both cripples you might say, joined forces and elected to beat all the others. Well, they did, and that there's the trouble. Long and patient, the other cowboys tried to beat them two-leg games and haven't done her yet. Maybe if Monty and Link were perfectly sound in their legs like the other cowboys, there wouldn't have been such a holler, but no sound cowboy'll ever stand up for a disgrace like that. Why, down at the bunks in the evening, it's some mortifying the way Bonnie and Link crow over the others in the outfit. They're taking on pretty superior airs, you might say. You couldn't reach up to Monty with a trim spruce pole, and Link, well, he's just amazingly scornful.
It's a swell game, isn't it?
Says Link, powerfully sarcastic. Well, what's hurting you low-down common cowmen? You keep harping on Monty's game leg and on my game leg. If we had both good legs, we'd beat you all the worst. It's brains that wins at golf. Brains and all that aristocratic blood, which you fellers seem to have mighty little of, and then Monty he blows smoke powerfully carelessly and superior, and he says, well, sure, it's a swell game. You cow-headed gents think beef and brawn ought to have the call over skill and gray matter. You all have to back up and get down and go out and learn the game. You don't know a ball flip from a Chinese sandwich. All you have to do is waggle with a club and give that ball a whack. Whenever Monty gets to using them queer names, the boys go around kind of dotty, and Monty and Link have got the books and directions of the game, and they won't let the other boys see them. They show them the rules, but that's all. And of course, every game ends up in a row almost before it even gets started. The boys all are in terrible earnest about this here golf. And I want us to say, for the goods of ranchin', not mention possibly a fight, that Monty and Link have got to be beat. There'll be no peace round this ranch till it be done.
Madeline's guests were much amused, and as for herself, in spite of her scarcely considered doubt, Stillwell's tale of woe occasioned her anxiety. However, she could hardly control her mirth.
What in the world can I do?
Well, I reckon I couldn't say. I only come to you for advice. It seems that a kind of a queer kind of game has locoed my cowboys, and from the time I've been ranching, now it's at a standstill. It sounds ridiculous, I know, but cowboys are as strange as a wild cow. All I'm for sure of is that the conceit has to be taken out of Monty and Link. Once, and just once, we'll square it, and then we can resume our work.
Stillwell, listen, said Madeline brightly. We'll arrange a match game, a foursome, between Monty and Link and your best-picked team. Castleton, who is an expert golfer, will umpire. My sisters and friends will take turns as caddies for your team. That will be fair, considering yourselves as the weaker. Caddies may coach. Perhaps expert advice is all that is necessary for your team to defeat Monty's.
Well, that's a grand idea, declared Stillwell with instant decision. When can we have this here match game?
Well, today, this afternoon. We'll all ride over to the links.
Well, I reckon I'll be some in debt to you, Miss Majesty, and all your guests,
replied Stillwell warmly. He rose with sombrero in hand, and a twinkle in his eye again prompted Madeline to wonder.
And now I'll be going to fix up for this game of cowboy golf. Adios.
The idea was as enthusiastically received by Madeline's guests as it had been by Stillwell. They were highly amused and speculative to a point of taking sides and making wagers on their choices. Moreover, this situation, so frankly revealed by Stillwell, had completed their deep mystification. They were now absolutely nonplussed by the singular characteristics of the American cowboy. Madeline was pleased to note how seriously they had taken the cattleman's story. She had a little throb of wild expectancy that made her both fear and delight in this afternoon's prospect. The June days had set in warm, in fact hot, during the noon hours, and this, incongruent with her insensations of visitors, a tendency to profit by the experience of those used to the southwest. They indulged in the restful siesta during the heated term of the day. Madeline was awoken by Majesty's well-known whistle and pounding on the gravel. Then she heard the other horses. When she went out, she found her party assembled in golf attire,
and with spirits to match their costumes. Castleton, especially, appeared in a golf cart that beggared of description. Madeline had faint misgivings when she reflected on what Monty and Nels and Nick might do under the influence of that blazing garment.
"Oh, Majesty," cried Helen, as Madeline went up to her horse, "don't make him kneel. Try that flying mount. We all want to see it. It's so stunning. But the way I must do it, I must have him kneel, or I can't reach the stirrup. He's so tremendously high."
Madeline had to yield to the laughing existence of her friends, and after all of them except Flo were up, she made Majesty go down to one knee. She stood on his left side, facing back, and then took a firm grip on the bridle and pommel in his mane. After she had slipped a toe of her boot firmly into the stirrup, she called Majesty. He jumped and swung her up into the saddle.
"Now, we just have to see how it's done by watching Florence," said Madeline.
The Western girl was at her best in riding habit and with her horse. It was beautiful to see the ease and grace with which she accompanied the cowboy's flying mount. Then she led the party down the slope and across the flat to climb up the mesa. Madeline never saw a group of her cowboys without looking them over, almost unconsciously, for her foreman, Gene Stewart. This afternoon, as usual, he was not present. However, she now had a sense, of which she was wholly conscious, that she was both disappointed and irritated. He had not really been attentive to her guests, and he, of all her cowboys, was the one of whom they wanted most to see something. Helen particularly had asked him to attend the match, but Stewart was with the cattle. Madeline thought of his faithfulness and was ashamed of her momentary lapse into that old habit of desiring things irrespectable of reason. Stewart, however, immediately slipped out of her mind as she surveyed the group of cowboys on the links. By actual count, there were 16, not including Stillwell, and the same number of splendid horses, all shiny and clean, grazing away on the rim in the care of the Mexican lads. The cowboys were on dress parade, looking very different, in Madeline's eyes at least, from the way cowboys usually appeared. But they were real and natural to her guests, and they were so picturesque that they might have been stage cowboys instead of real ones. Sombreros with silver buckles, horsehair bands with evidence, bright silk scarves, embroidered vests, and fringed and ornament chaps, big swinging guns, and clinking silver spurs lent a festive appearance. Madeline and her party were at once eagerly surrounded by the cowboys, and she found it difficult to repress a smile. If these cowboys were so remarkable to her, what must they be to her guests?
"Well, y'all raced over, I seen," said Stillwell, taking Madeline's bridle. Get on. We're sure amazingly glad and proud. And, Miss Majesty, I'm offering to beg pardon for the way the boys are packing guns. Maybe it ain't polite, but it was Stewart's orders."
"Stewart's orders?"
echoed Madeline, and her friends were suddenly silent.
"I reckon he'd have no chances on the boys being suddenly surprised by raiders. And there's raiders operating in the Guadalupes, that's all. Nothing to worry over. I was just explaining."
Madeline, with several of her party, expressed relief, but Helen showed excitement and then disappointment.
"Oh, I wanted something to happen,"
she cried. 16 pairs of keen cowboy eyes fastened intently upon her pretty face, and Madeline divined, if Helen did not, then the desired consummation was not far off.
"And so do I," said Dot Combs. "It would be perfectly lovely to have a real adventure."
The gaze of 16 cowboys shifted and sought the face of the other discontented girl. Madeline laughed, and Stillwell wore his strange moving smile.
Well, I reckon you ladies sure won't have to go home unhappy. Why, as boss of this here outfit, I'd feel myself disgraced forever if you didn't have your wish. You just wait. And now, ladies, the matter on hand might not be amusing or exciting to you, but this here cowboy outfit is powerfully important, and all the help you can give us will sure be powerfully and thankfully received. You take a look upon them there links. Do you all see them two apologies of human beings prancing around like a couple hobbled broncos? Well, you're gazing at Monty Prince and Link Stevens, who all of a sudden got too swell to associate with their old bunkies. They're practicing for the tournament. They don't want my boys to see how they're handling them there crooked clubs.
Have you picked your teams? Inquired Madeline.
Stillwell mopped his red face with an immense bandana and showed something of confusion and perplexity.
I've 16 boys, and they all want to play, he replied. Picking the team ain't going to be an easy job, and maybe it won't be healthy either. There's Nels and Nick. They all just stated cheerfully like that if they don't play, we won't have any game at all. Nick never tried before, and Nels all he wants is a crack at Monty with them crooked clubs.
I suggest you let your boys drive from the tee and choose the two who drive the furthest, said Madeline.
Stillwell's perplexed face lit up.
Well, that there's a plumb good idea. The boys will stand for that.
Wherewith he broke up the admiring circle of cowboys that were round the ladies.
Grab a club, all you cow punchers, and march our hair and take a swipe with this little white bean.
The cowboys obeyed. There was considerable difficulty over the choice of clubs and who should try first. The latter question had to be adjusted by lot. However, after Frankie Slade made several ineffectual attempts to hit the ball from the teeing ground, at last sent it only a few yards, and the other players weren't so eager to follow. Stillwell had to push Booley forward, and Booley executed a most miserable shot, and retired to the laughing comments of his comrades. The efforts of several succeeding cowboys attested to the extreme difficulty of making a good drive.
Well, Nick, it's your turn, said Stillwell. Bill, I ain't so all fired particular about playing, replied Nick. Why, you was roaring about it a little while ago. Are you afraid to get up there and show how bad you'd play?
No, just plain concern for my fellow cowpunchers, answered Nick with spirit. I'm appreciating how bad they play, and I don't mean to show them up.
Well, you gotta show me, said Stillwell. I know you ain't seen a golfing stick in your life, and what more, I bet you can't hit that little ball square, not a dozen cracks at all.
Bill, I'm too much of a gentleman to take your money, but you know I'm from Missouri. You give me a club. Nick's angry confidence seemed to evaporate as one after another he took up and handled the clubs. It was plain he had never wielded one, but also it was plain that he was not the kind of man to give in. Finally, he selected a driver and looked doubtfully at the small knob and then stepped into position on the teeing ground. Nick Steele stood 6'4" in height. He had the rider's wiry slenderness, yet he was broad in the shoulder. His arms were long. Manifestly he was also exceedingly powerful. He swung that driver aloft and whirled it down with a tremendous swing. Crack! The white ball disappeared, and from where it was rose a tiny cloud of dust. Madeline's quick sight caught the ball as it landed somewhat to the right. It was shooting low and level with the speed of a bullet. It went up and up in a swift, beautiful flight, and then it lost its speed, began to sail, to curve, and to drop, and it fell out of sight beyond the rim of the mesa. Madeline had never seen a drive that approached this one. It was magnificent, beyond belief except for the actual evidence of her own eyes. The yelling of the cowboys probably brought Nick Steele out of the astonishing spell which he beheld his shot. Then Nick, suddenly alive to the situation, recovered from his trance and rested nonchalantly upon his club, surveying Stillwell and the boys. After their first surprised outburst, they were dumb. "You-all seen that?" Nick grandly waved his hand. "Thought I was joking, didn't you? Why, I used to go to St. Louis and Kansas City to play this here game. There was some talk of the golf clubs taking me down east to play the champions, but I never cared for the game. It was too easy for me. Them fellers back in Missouri were a lot of cheap duds anyhow, always kicking about. Whenever I'd hit a ball hard, I'd always lost it. Why, I had to hit that ball off the mesa to show you. I sure won't be playing on your team." With that, Nick sauntered away towards the horses. Stillwell appeared crushed, and not a scornful word was hurled after Nick, which fact proved the nature of his victory. Then Nels stood for the limelight. As far as it was possible for this iron-faced cowboy to be so, he was blond and suave. He remarked to Stillwell and the other cowboys that sometimes it was painful for them to judge the gifts of superior cowboys such as belonging to Nick and himself. He picked up the club Nick had used and called for a new ball. Stillwell carefully built up a small mound of sand and placed the ball upon it, squaring away to watch. He looked grim and expectant. Nels was not so large a man as Nick, and did not look so formidable as he waved his club at the gaping cowboys. Still, he was lithe, tough, and strong. Briskly, with manner, he stepped up and then delivered a mighty swing at that ball. He missed. The power and the momentum of his swing flung him off his feet, and he actually turned upside down and spun round upon his head. The cowboys howled. Stillwell's laugh rolled across the mesa. Madeline and her guests found it impossible to restrain their mirth, and when Nels got up, he cast a reproachful look at Madeline. His feelings were hurt. His second attempt, by no means so violent, resulted in a clean miss as well, and brought jeers from the cowboys. Nels' red face flamed redder. Angrily he swung again. The mound of sand spread over the teeing ground, and the exasperating little ball rolled a few inches. This time, he had to build up the sand mound and replace the ball himself. Stillwell stood scornfully by, and the boys addressed remarks to Nels.
"Take off them blinders." "Nels, your eyes are sure bad," said another. "You don't hit where'n you look." "Nels, your left eye has sprung a limp." "Why, you'll flog you. You couldn't hit that ball."
Nels essayed again, once to meet failure. Then carefully he gathered himself together, gauged distance, balanced the club, and swung cautiously, and the head of the club made a beautiful curve round toward the ball. "Sure, it's just a crooked club," he declared. He changed clubs, made another signal failure. Rage suddenly possessed him, and he began to swing wildly. Always it appeared that little evasive little ball was not where he aimed. Stillwell hunched his huge bulk, leaning hands upon knees, and roared his riotous mirth. The cowboys leapt up and down in glee.
"You can't hit that ball,"
sang out one of the noisiest. A few more whirling, desperate lunges on the parts of Nels, all as futile as the ball had been thin air, finally brought to the dogged cowboy a realization that golf was beyond him. Stillwell bawled.
"Oh, ha, ha, ha! Nels, you're too old. Your eye's no good."
Nels slammed down the club, and when he straightened up with the red leaving his face, Then the real pride and fire of the man showed. Deliberately, he stepped off 10 paces, turned toward the little mound upon which the ball was resting. His arm shot down, elbow crooked, hand like a claw.
"Aw, Nels, this is just fun,"
yelled Stillwell, but swift as a gleam of light, Nels flashed his gun, and the report came with the action. Chips flew from the mound. Nels had hit it without raising the dust. Then he dropped the gun back into its sheath and faced the cowboys. "Maybe my eyes ain't so bad after all," he said coolly, and started to walk off.
"But look here, Nels," yelled Stillwell. "We come out to play golf. We can't let you knock the ball around with your gun. What do you want to get mad for? It's only fun. Now you and Nick can hang around here and be sociable. We ain't depreciating your company none, and your usefulness on occasion. And if you ain't got some inborn politeness sufficient to do the gallantry before ladies, why, you remember Stewart's orders."
"Stewart's orders?" inquired Nels, coming to a sudden halt.
"That's what I said,"
replied Stillwell.
"His orders. Are you forgetting orders? You're a fine cowboy, you, Nick, and Monty. Especially that you are good at obeying orders."
Nels took off a sombrero and scratched his head. "Bill, I reckon I'm forgetful, but I'm mad. And I'm remembering pretty soon, and maybe my manners will come back to me."
"Well, sure you would," replied Stillwell. "Well, now, we don't seem to be proceeding much with my golf team. Next ambitious player, step up."
In Ambrose, who showed some skill in driving, Stillwell found one for his team. The succeeding players, however, were so poor and so evenly matched that the earnest Stillwell was in despair. He lost his temper just as speedily as Nels had. Finally, Ed Lynn's wife appeared to ride up with Ambrose's wife, and perhaps that helped, for Ed suddenly disclosed ability that made Stillwell single him out.
"Well, let me coach him a little bit," said Bill.
"Sure, if you like," replied Ed. "But I know more about this game than you do."
"Well, then let's see you hit a ball straight. Seems to me you got good all fired quick. It's amazing strange it is."
Here Bill looked around to discover the two wives modestly casting eyes of admiration towards their husbands.
"It ain't so darn strange after all. Maybe that'll help some. Now, Ed, you stand up there and don't sling your club as if you was roping a steer. You just come around easy like and hit her straight."
Ed made several attempts which, although better than those of his predecessors, were rather discouraging to the acting coach. Presently, after a particularly atrocious shot, Stillwell strode in distress here and there and finally stopped a dozen paces or more in front of the teeing ground. Ed, who for a cowboy was somewhat phlegmatic, calmly made ready for another attempt.
"Fart,"
he called. Stillwell stared.
"Fart,"
yelled Ed.
"What you hollering that way at me for?"
demanded Bill.
"I mean for you to lope off in the distance and get away from in front." "Oh, that's one of them darn crazy words Monty's always yelling. Well, I reckon I'm safe enough here. You couldn't hit me in a million years."
"Bill,
"Who's away?" urged Ed. "Didn't I say you couldn't hit me? What I'm coaching you for? Because you hitting crooked, ain't it? Well, you go ahead and you break your back."
Ed Linton was a short, heavy man, and his stocky build gave evidence of considerable strength. His former strokes had not been made at the expense of exertion, and now he got ready for a supreme effort. A sudden silence clamped down over the cowboys. It was one of those fateful moments when the air was charged with disaster, and as Ed swung the club It fairly whistled. Crack! Instantly there was a thump, but no one saw the ball until it dropped from Stillwell's shrinking body. His big hands went sporadically to the place that hurt, and a terrible groan rumbled out of him. Then the cowboys broke into a frenzy of mirth that seemed to find adequate expression only in dancing and rolling accompanying of their howls. Stillwell recovered his dignity as soon as he caught his breath, and he advanced with a rueful face.
"Well, boys, that's on Bill," he said. "I'll be living proof of the pig-headedness of a man. Ed, you win. You're the captain of the team. You hit straight, and if I hadn't been obstacle in the way, that ball sure would have gone clear to the Chihuahua Mountains."
Then, making a megaphone of his huge hands, he yelled a loud blast at Monty and Link.
"Hey, you swaller golfers, we be waiting. Come on, if you ain't scared."
Instantly, Monty and Link quit practicing. Like two emperors came slinking across the links.
"Guess my bluff didn't work,"
said Stillwell. Then he turned to Madeline and her friends.
"I sure hope, Miss Majesty, that y'all won't weaken and go over to the enemy. Monty is some elegant, and besides, he has a way of getting people to agree with him. He'd be plumb wild when he hears that he and Link are up against it. It's a square deal. He wouldn't help us or lend us the book that shows us how to play. And besides, it's policy for us to beat him. And now if you'll elect who's to be caddies and umpire, I'd be powerfully obliged."
Madeline's friends were hugely amused by the prospective match, but except for Dorothy and Castleton, they disclaimed any ambition of active participation. Accordingly, Madeline appointed Castleton to judge the play, Dorothy to act as caddy for Ed Litton, and she herself to be caddy for Ambrose. While Stillwell beamingly announced this momentary news to his team and supporters, Mont and Lynx were striding up. Both were diminutive in size, bow-legged, lame in one foot, and altogether unprepossessing. Link was young, and Monty's years, more than twice that of Link's, had left their mark. But it would have been impossible to tell Monty's age. As Stillwell said, Monty was burned to the color and hardness of cinder. He never minded the heat, always wore heavy sheepskin chaps with the wool outside. This made him look broader than he was long. Link, partial to leather, had since became Madeline's chauffeur, taken to leather altogether. He carried no weapon, but Monty wore a huge gun sheath and holster. Link smoked a cigarette and looked coolly impudent. Monty was dark-faced and swaggering, for all the world like a barbarian chief.
"That Monty makes my flesh creep," said Helen, low-voiced. "Really, Stillwell, is he so bad? Desperate as I've heard? Did he ever kill anybody?"
"Sure, maybe twice as many as Nels,"
replied Stillwell cheerfully.
"Oh, and is that nice Mr. Nels a desperado too? I wouldn't have thought so. He seemed so kind and old-fashioned and soft-voiced."
"Nels is sure an example of men, Miss Helen. Don't you be listening to his soft voice. He's really as bad as a sidewinder rattlesnake."
At this prudence, Monty and Link reached the teeing ground, and Stillwell went out to meet them. The other cowboys pressed forward to surround the trio. Madeline heard Stillwell's voice. Evidently, he was explaining that his team was to have skilled advice during the play. Perhaps there came from the center of the group a loud, angry roar that broke off suddenly. There followed excited voices, all mingled together. Presently, Monty appeared, breaking away from restraining hands, and he strode towards Madeline. Monty Pierce was the type of cowboy who had never been known to speak to a woman unless he was first addressed, and then he answered in a blunt awkwardness shy. Upon this great occasion, however, it appeared that he meant to protest or plead with Madeline, for he showed stress of emotion. Madeline had never gotten acquainted with Monty. She was a little in awe, if not in fear of him, and now she found it that for her to keep in mind that more than any of the others of the wild fellows on her ranch that this one should be dealt with as if he were a big boy. Monty removed his sombrero, something he never done before, and the single instant when it had come off was long enough to show his entire head was bald. This was one of the hallmarks of that terrible Montana prairie fire through which he had fought to save the life of a child. Madeline did not forget it, and all at once she wanted to take Monty's side. Remembering Stillwell's wisdom, however, she forbore yielding to sentiment and called upon her wits.
Miss Hammond, began Monty, stammering, I'm extending admiring greetings to you and your friends. Link and me were right down to play the match game with you watching, but Bill says you're going to caddy for his team and coach 'em on the fine points. And I want to ask, all respectfully, is that fair and square?
Monty, that is for you to say, replied Madeline. It was my suggestion, but if you object in the least, of course we shall withdraw. It seemed fair to me, because you have learned the game and you are an expert, and I understand the boys have no chance with you. And then you've coached Link. I think it would be sportsmanlike for you to accept the handicap.
Ah, a handicap. That what Bill was driving at. Why didn't he say so? Every time Bill comes to a word that's pie to us old golfers, he just kind of stumbles. Miss Majesty, you made it all clear as print, and I might say, with becoming modesty, that you wasn't mistaken none about me being sportsmanlike. Me and Link, we was born that way, and we accept the handicap. Lacking that handicap, I reckon Link and me would have no ambition to play our most beautiful game. And thank you, Miss Majesty, and all your friends. I want to add that if Bill's outfit couldn't beat us before, they got a swell chance now with you ladies watching me and Link.
Monty had seemed to expand with pride as he delivered this speech, and at the end he bowed low and turned away. He joined the group round Stillwell, and once more there was animated discussion and argument and explanation. One of the cowboys came for Castleton and led him away to exploit upon ground rules. It seemed to Madeline that the game never would begin. She strode to the rim of the mesa, arm in arm with Edith Wayne, and while Edith talked she looked out over the gray valley leading to the rugged black mountains and the vast gray wastes. In the foreground on the gray slope she saw cattle in movement, and the cowboys riding to and fro. She thought of Stuart, and then Boyd Harvey came for them, saying all details had been arranged. Stillwell met them halfway, and this cool, dry old cattleman, whose face and manner scarcely changed at the announcement of a cattle raid, now showed extreme agitation.
Well, Miss Majesty, we've gone and made a fuzzle right at the start, he said dejectedly.
A fuzzle? But the game has not begun yet, replied Madeline.
A bad start, I mean. It's amazingly bad, and we're licked already.
What in the world is wrong?
She wanted to laugh, but Stillwell's distress restrained her.
Well, it's this way. That darn Monty is as cute and slick as a fox. After he got done declaiming about the handicap he and Link was just so happy to take, he got Castleton over here and drove us all dotty with his crazy golf names. And then he borrowed Castleton's golf coat. I reckon borrowed is some kind of kind word. He just took the blazing coat off the Englishman. Though I ain't saying but that Castleton was agreeable when he tumbled to Monty's meeting, which was nothing more than to break Ambrose's heart. That coat dazzles Ambrose. You know how vain Ambrose is. Why, he'd die to get to wear that Englishman's golf coat, and Monty forestalled him. It's plumb pitiful to see the look in Ambrose's eyes. won't be playing for very much. Then what do you think? Monty, he fixed Ed Linton all right. Usually Ed's easy going and cool, but now he's on the rampage. Well, maybe it's news to you to learn that Ed's wife is powerfully, terribly jealous of him. Ed was something of a devil about them women. Monty goes over and tells Beulah, well, that's Ed's wife, that Ed's gonna have for a caddy that lovely Miss Dorothy with them goo-goo eyes. I reckon this was some disrespectful, but with all due respect to Miss Dorothy, she has a pair of unbridled eyes. Maybe it's just natural for her to look at a feller like that. Oh, it's all right. I ain't saying nothing. I know it's all proper and regular for girls back east to be using their eyes, but out here it's bound to result disastrous. All the boys talk amongst themselves about Miss Dot's eyes, and all they brag about which feller's the luckiest. Anyway, sure Ed's wife knows it, and Monty up and told her that it was fine of her to come out and see how swell Ed was prancing around under the light of Miss Dot's brown eyes. Beulah calls over Ed, figuratively speaking, and ropes him for a minute. Ed comes back a-hugging a grouch as big as a hill. Oh, it was funny. He was going to be punching Monty's head off. And Monty stands there and laughs and says Monty sarcastic as water. Ed, we all know you being a heap married man, but you're some loco to give yourself away. And that there's settled, Ed. He's touchy about the way Beulah henpecks him, and he lost his spirits. Now he couldn't play marbles, let alone golf. No, that Monty's too smart, and I reckon he was right about brains when it comes to winning.
The game began. At first, Madeline and Dorothy essayed to direct the endeavors of their respective players, but all they said and did only made their play turn worse. At the third hole they were far behind and hopelessly bewildered. With Monty's borrowed coat, with its dazzling effect upon Ambrose and Link's often repeated allusions of Ed's matrimonial state, Stillwell's disgust, and the clamoring of good intent in pursuit of the ladies, Ambrose and Ed wore through all the manner of strange play until it became ridiculous.
"Hey, Link,"
came Monty's voice booming over the links.
"Our esteemed rivals are playing shinny."
Madeline and Dorothy gave up presently, when the game became a rout, and they sat down with their followers to watch the fun. Whether by hook or crook, Ed and Ambrose forged ahead to come close upon Monty and Link. Castleton disappeared in a mass of shouting cowboys. When the compact mat disintegrated, Castleton came forth rather hurriedly, it appeared, to stalk back towards his hostess and friends.
"Look!" exclaimed Helen in delight. "Castleton is actually excited. Whatever did they do to him? Oh, this is immense."
Castleton was excited, indeed, and also somewhat disheveled.
"By Jove, that was a rum go," he said as he came up. "Never saw such bloomin' golf. I resign my office as umpire."
Only upon considerable pressure did he reveal the reason. "It was like this, don't you know? They was all together over there watching each other. Monty Price's ball dropped into a hazard, and he moved it to improve the lie. And by Jove, they all been doing that. But over there the game was waxing hot. Stillwell and his cowboys saw Monty move the ball, and there was a row. They appealed to me, and I corrected the play and showed the rules. Monty appeared and agreed that he was in the wrong. However, when it came to moving his ball back to the former lie in the hazard, there was more bloomin' trouble. Monty placed the ball to suit him, and then he transfixed me with an evil eye. He said, 'Duke,' he says, 'I wish the bloody cowboy would not call me that. Duke, maybe this ball ain't as important as international politics or some other things relating,
but there's some health and peace depending upon it. You understand? For some space over our opponents had come a dead to honor and sportsmanlike conduct. I calculated the game depending on our next drive. I'm placing my ball as near to where I figure it when human eyesight could be. You seen where it was the same as I seen, and you're the umpire, and Duke, I take you for an honorable man. Moreover, never in my born days has my word been doubted without sorrow. So I'm asking you, wasn't my ball laying just about here? And that bloody little desperado smiled cheerfully, and he dropped his right hand down near the butt of his gun. By Jove, he did. And then I had to tell a bloomin' lie. Castleton even caught the tone of Monty's voice, but it was plain that he had not the least conception that Monty had been fooling. Madeline and her friend divined it, however, and there had been no need of reserve. They let loose the fountains of mirth. End of chapter 13.